I never liked weddings. Not because I didn't believe in love, but because they exposed too much, especially when you weren't the bride. You see, weddings aren't just about vows and promises. They're about revealing the cracks we hide. The way a couple looks at each other, or doesn't. The way families smile through clenched teeth, pretending everything is perfect. I remember my first wedding as a child. The grand cake, the shiny dresses, but it wasn't the colors I remembered. It was the silence between the bride and her father. It was the way my aunt avoided looking at her husband when they danced. I saw it then. Even as a kid, weddings can be the perfect backdrop for hiding everything that's wrong. And here I was again at another wedding, feeling that same familiar discomfort. But this time, it wasn't just the usual tension. No, this time it was different. My husband, Ethan, barely looked at me, and when he did, his eyes were cold, like I was nothing more than a shadow next to him. I held our daughter, Maya, on my hip, the weight of her innocence somehow making everything feel heavier. As the ceremony unfolded, I felt like a ghost, an accessory to the day. All those smiles around me, and yet, none of them were for me. But soon I would have my turn. I wasn't going to stay invisible anymore. The moment we stepped into the venue, I was hit by a wave of brightness, the kind that feels almost too much. Everything was white and gold, walls of flowers, towering chandeliers, and marble floors that seemed to reflect the light too perfectly, like they were trying to hide something. The air smelled faintly of expensive perfume and something sharp, like a reminder that money could make anything look beautiful. But beneath all that glitter, I could feel the weight of it, the tension. I had been here before, but never like this. Never when it felt like everyone else belonged, and I was just there. I looked down at Maya, her tiny fingers gripping my blouse, completely unaware of the storm swirling around me. Ethan walked beside me, straight-backed as always, adjusting his cufflinks with that practiced ease. He looked polished, confident, as if he owned the space, while I felt out of place, clumsy, exhausted, like a shadow trailing him. The whole room seemed to orbit around him as he greeted family, shaking hands with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He didn't even glance at me once. Not until I nudged him gently, holding Maya on my hip, and whispered his name. He glanced at me with barely a flicker of recognition, then his eyes quickly darted back to a conversation with some distant relative. It was as if I wasn't there at all, like I was just an extension of the baby carrier on my arm. I had become so good at pretending it didn't hurt, so good at swallowing the humiliation and hiding behind my smile, but today, it felt suffocating. Stay quiet, look pretty, Ethan had told me earlier. I shifted Maya again, trying not to feel the weight of his words. I tried to breathe, but I couldn't escape the sense that I was just a backdrop to someone else's perfect moment. Ethan laughed at something his brother, Thomas, said, and I couldn't help but notice the warmth in his eyes for Thomas, a warmth he never seemed to have for me. The reception hall buzzed with laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft hum of a string quartet. It was beautiful, perfect even, but it felt like I wasn't really there. I watched Ethan move through the crowd, laughing and talking with everyone except me. He was in his element, charming the relatives, engaging in conversations with an ease that only someone who didn't have to try could manage. I stood off to the side, holding Maya, who was blissfully unaware of the world spinning around her. I could feel the weight of it all, the bright lights, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the cold emptiness between Ethan and me. I caught him adjusting his suit, the movement smooth, practiced, like he was preparing for something important. I wanted to be seen, to feel like I was more than just a figure in the background, but as he slid past me without a glance, I realized I was nothing more than a placeholder in his life, an accessory to him, just a baby carrier. Nothing more. I wasn't a wife or a partner. I was just the one who held Maya while he worked the room. I shifted her on my hip again, trying to adjust the way she was clinging to me, but it felt like a distraction, something to hold on to while everything else fell apart. I used to think we'd be different. When we first met, Ethan had seen me, the real me, the one who laughed loudly at dinner parties, the one who took risks. I remember how he'd ask me about my day, about my dreams, about the things that made me feel alive. But that was before we got married. Now, all I felt was invisible. I wanted to speak up, to ask him if he noticed me at all, but I knew what would happen. The sharp glance, the forced smile, the not now dismissal. He didn't want to be bothered with me. He was too busy proving something to everyone around him, pretending we had this perfect life, while ignoring the woman he married. I glanced over at him, leaning in to whisper something to Thomas, his brother, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen for months. I stood there, feeling the tightness in my chest, fighting the urge to shrink into the shadows. Ethan didn't look at me, not once. Not even when I reached out and touched his arm, hoping for some acknowledgement, some connection. He pulled away slightly, a small twitch in his body as though my touch burned him. My stomach turned as I realized what had happened. What was happening? I wasn't a wife anymore. I wasn't even a partner. I was just here to keep up appearances, to smile, to look pretty, and to hold Maya while he ran the show. I tried to laugh it off, turning back to the table, but the feeling of being invisible only grew. I wasn't part of this world anymore. I had become part of the furniture, just like the others, the polished wives who stood silently, nodding at the right moments, blending into the background. They'd been trained to be quiet, to be pretty, to be nothing more than a vessel for the people around them. And suddenly, I wasn't sure who I was anymore. I felt it before he even said it. That pulled in my stomach, like I was being dragged underwater. Ethan had that way of looking at me, like I was a problem he didn't want to deal with, like I was nothing more than a small inconvenience. We'd been at the reception for hours, and I hadn't seen him truly look at me once. I tried to make my way over to him, holding Maya as she clung to me, squirming in my arms. I needed to feel like I mattered again. But the moment I reached him, he flinched, his eyes darting quickly to my face before quickly looking away. "Stay quiet, look pretty," he muttered under his breath. "You're just a baby carrier today." His words hit me like a slap across the face, but I didn't let it show. I swallowed, pressing my lips together, trying to force the tears back. He didn't understand what it meant to be seen, not really. I wasn't just carrying Maya. I was carrying everything. All the hurt, all the exhaustion, and all the years of feeling invisible, reduced to a vessel for his convenience. But at that moment, something inside me snapped. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even betrayal. It was a quiet realization. This wasn't the man I married. He'd become a stranger, someone who didn't care enough to even look me in the eye. I turned away from him, glancing around the room. The other women were polished, composed, smiling through their roles like they'd been trained for this. They knew how to play their part, how to be the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect accessory. I could see it in their eyes, the way they moved through the night, never once stepping out of line. And I realized then, with a cold clarity, that I was one of them now. I had become part of the background, nothing more than a prop to complete the image. No one saw me, not Ethan, not anyone. I wasn't his partner anymore. I was just the one who held the baby and made sure everything looked good. I was no longer a person. I was a role to be played. The thought hit me harder than I expected. All the years of our marriage, the little moments where I thought things would get better, where I convinced myself that if I just tried harder, it would work, all those years had been wasted. I wasn't seen. Not by Ethan, not by anyone. I wanted to scream, but instead, I smiled. I smiled because it was easier. Because if I let the tears come now, it would all be too real, and I wasn't ready to face that. Not yet. So, I kept my head down, tucked my pain away, and held Maya tighter as I walked to the edge of the crowd. I was just another invisible woman in a sea of smiles, doing what I was expected to do. But I knew, deep down, this would be the last time. Because something inside me was starting to wake up, and I wasn't going to stay invisible much longer. I didn't expect it. Nobody had said anything, and I hadn't prepared for it. But there it was, like a sudden jolt in the middle of a calm sea. Tommy, the groom, smiling brightly, looking right at me. "Maya, would you like to say a few words?" For a second, the room seemed to freeze. I could hear the soft clink of glasses, the murmur of conversation, the distant hum of the band. But all I could focus on was the microphone being passed to me like it was a grenade. My stomach tightened. I wasn't ready. Not now. Not in this moment when I felt smaller than ever before. The whole evening had been a blur. Pretend smiles, forced laughter, the polite conversation that never quite reached my heart. But now, with the microphone in my hand, all of it seemed to crash down on me at once. I glanced at Ethan, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but instead, his face twisted in a quiet, controlled fury. His jaw clenched, and his body language screamed tension. I could feel the weight of his unspoken words pressing against my chest. He leaned in close, his breath warm against my ear. "Don't make a scene," he hissed. "Just smile and get it over with." I could feel the heat of his words searing through me, but I couldn't stop what was coming. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. He didn't want me to speak, but I could already feel something stirring inside me, a need to be seen, to have my voice heard for once. I took the microphone, and it felt heavier than I expected. It wasn't just a device to amplify sound. It was a symbol, a way for me to finally say what I'd been holding in for so long. My heart was thudding in my chest, and for a brief moment, the room felt too small, too tight. I cleared my throat, trying to steady my shaking hands. As I opened my mouth, I could feel the pressure of all those eyes on me, like the entire room had shifted focus. I wasn't just the wife holding a baby anymore. I was a woman with something to say, and for the first time in a long time, I realized I wasn't just going to play along. I glanced at Ethan, his face frozen in a tight smile, his eyes burning into me. His warning still echoed in my mind, but the silence in the room was deafening, and I couldn't go back. I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. "Weddings are about moments," I started, my voice barely above a whisper. I took a shaky breath, steadying myself. "Moments we remember." The microphone felt like a foreign object in my hand, cold, heavy, and strangely powerful. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me, and the room fell silent. All eyes were on me, but in that silence, I could hear my heart thudding in my chest. I wanted to run, to put the mic down, to disappear into the crowd. But I couldn't, not this time. I cleared my throat, trying to steady myself, my hands still trembling. I glanced at Ethan, but he was already staring at me, his jaw tight, his eyes narrow. I took a breath and began, my voice softer than I wanted it to be. I remember my wedding day. I was 27, nervous but hopeful, thinking that I had found my forever. I thought that marriage was this perfect thing, something built on love, on partnership, something that would last through everything. I imagined Sunday mornings with coffee, the smell of baby lotion, and hands that would always reach for mine, no matter how tired or worn out we were. I paused, my throat tightening. I could feel the eyes of everyone on me, but I wasn't sure who I was speaking to anymore. Maybe it was to Ethan. Maybe it was to all the women who had sat quietly pretending, just like I had. But somewhere along the way, I continued, my voice gaining strength. I stopped being a partner. I became a vessel. I was just here to hold our child, to make sure everything looked perfect. I was just a baby carrier. That's what I became. And you know what? Ethan, you stopped seeing me. You stopped seeing who I was, who we were, and you replaced me with a role, a title. You didn't see me anymore. You just saw the image, the thing that could carry your child and hold everything together while you lived your life. The words spilled out before I could stop them, and once they started, they didn't stop. I wasn't holding back anymore. I couldn't. I thought that if I just did everything right, if I kept up appearances, everything would work itself out. I thought if I loved you enough, if I made sure everything ran smoothly, if I was always here, always present, always quiet, maybe love would come back. But that's not love. Love isn't a performance. When you stop seeing each other, when you stop hearing each other, it's no longer a marriage. It's just a performance. And I was just playing my part. There was a sharp intake of breath from the crowd, and the silence deepened. It was like the room had frozen in time, all of us suspended in the air. I could feel Ethan's gaze burning into me, his anger building, his control slipping through his fingers. His hands were clenched, his jaw working, and I could see the muscles in his neck tightening with each word I spoke. But I couldn't stop now. Not after everything. Maybe that's what this was all along. I went on. A performance. A show for everyone to see, where we smile and pretend everything is fine, but behind the curtain, It's empty. So here I am, standing in front of all of you, telling the truth, because it's the only thing I have left. I won't be invisible anymore. I felt a wave of emotions surge through me, but I held it in, locking eyes with Ethan. His rage was palpable, but I stood tall, refusing to look away. And to Thomas and Claire, I said, turning toward the newlyweds, I hope you never stop seeing each other. I hope you always remember what it means to be partners, to truly see each other, even when life gets messy. Because once you stop seeing each other, it's over. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of those final words settle in the air like a quiet storm. I handed the microphone back, my palms sweating, my heart racing, but I felt lighter than I had in years. I didn't look at anyone as I walked off the stage. I didn't need to. As soon as I handed the microphone back, I could feel the heat of Ethan's stare burning into me. The silence in the room was suffocating, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something. I didn't wait. I turned and walked off the stage, my feet moving faster than my thoughts. I just needed to get out of there, away from the eyes, the expectations, the suffocating pressure. But as soon as I reached the door, I heard his voice. Maya. It was sharp, low, the kind of voice that could freeze you in place. I turned, my heart racing in my chest, and there he was, his face flushed with fury, his eyes wild with anger. He grabbed my arm, pulling me aside, away from the crowd. What the hell was that? He hissed, his grip tight, like he was trying to hold me in place, forcing me to apologize for something I didn't regret. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. I wanted to push him off, wanted to scream, but instead, I stood there, holding Maya against my chest, feeling the weight of her innocence against the storm brewing in front of me. I could feel every muscle in my body tightening, every instinct telling me to stay silent, but I couldn't anymore. I didn't embarrass you. My voice was steady, but it trembled underneath. I just reminded them that I exist. His jaw clenched, and he stepped closer, his eyes blazing with anger. You think you're some kind of hero now? Some martyr? I wanted to cry, to scream, but I kept my composure, holding my ground. I'm not a hero, Ethan. I'm not a martyr. I'm your wife, and I'm tired of being invisible. He scoffed, shaking his head like I was the one who had lost my mind. You're just dramatic. His words were cold, calculated. He didn't understand. He didn't even try. The reality of it hit me harder than I thought it would. There was no fighting this. There was no reaching him anymore. Ethan wasn't going to change, and he sure as hell wasn't going to see me. You know what? He said, releasing his grip on my arm and taking a step back, his tone cutting through the air like a knife. I don't need this right now. You've made your point. Now go back to the party. Let's pretend everything is fine. He didn't even look at Maya. Didn't offer to help with her. He turned on his heel and walked back toward the celebration, like nothing had happened, like I didn't matter. My chest tightened, my stomach twisted in knots. I wanted to chase after him, to make him listen, to make him understand, but I couldn't, not anymore. I was standing in the cold, quiet parking lot, the distant sounds of the party swirling around me, and I realized something for the first time. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his love. I had been surviving without it for so long, and maybe now I was finally ready to stop pretending. I stood there for a moment longer, staring at the empty space where he had just been, before turning toward my car. I wasn't going back there. Not for him. Not for anyone. I had just told the truth, and for the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. I woke up to the soft hum of the coffee machine, the smell of freshly brewed coffee creeping through the kitchen. The bright morning light filtered through the curtains, a stark contrast to the heaviness that still clung to my chest. The night had been long, too long, but as I lay there, I knew Ethan had already moved on. He always did. He was in the kitchen, just like I expected. He poured himself a cup of coffee, the same routine we had for years. He kissed Maya's forehead as she squirmed in her high chair, her face lighting up with a smile, completely unaware of the storm that had passed through the night before. He flipped through his phone, checking messages as if nothing had changed, as if I hadn't just stood in front of an entire room and exposed the truth about us. I stayed in the doorway for a moment, watching him like a stranger. His movements were automatic, precise, like everything was fine, like he was still the man I married. But the truth was he wasn't. Not anymore. The man who once held my hand, who laughed with me at late-night talks and held me close during storms was gone. Now, there was only this cold version of him, this man who seemed to barely notice I was even there. As I watched him, a part of me wanted to scream, to shake him awake, to make him see what I saw. But another part, maybe the bigger part, knew he wasn't coming back. Not in the way I wanted. I had allowed myself to shrink for so long, to pretend that if I just did everything right, if I took care of the house, took care of Maya, took care of him, maybe then he'd notice me again. I'd convinced myself that love would return if I was perfect, if I kept up the illusion. But that illusion was shattered now. It was never about love. It was about control. Ethan didn't look at me. Not once. He didn't notice the emptiness in my eyes or the way my chest felt tight with unsaid words. He didn't apologize for the way he treated me last night or for the way he'd been treating me for years. He didn't even care. Instead, he took another sip of coffee and asked if I wanted any. No, I said, my voice hoarse. He didn't hear the pain in it. He never did. It started with a quiet click. The sound of a new bank account being set up, the first step toward something I hadn't felt in years. Independence. I hadn't realized how much I'd let go of myself until now. Ethan hadn't noticed when I started leaving small marks of my own on the world again. Emails to potential clients, job applications, daycare tours for Maya. He was too busy with his own life to even notice the shift in mine. But the shift was happening. It wasn't dramatic, not yet. But I could feel the ground beneath me shifting, like I was finally waking up from a long sleep. I started applying for freelance design projects, small ones at first, the kind of work I used to do before Maya was born. There was something beautiful about it, about working on something that was just mine, something that wasn't tied to Ethan's expectations. Each project felt like a small victory, proof that I still had value outside of the roles I'd been forced into. A logo for a local bakery, a small website redesign. Nothing glamorous, but they mattered. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of confidence. Every email, every completed task brought me closer to the version of myself I thought I had lost. I wasn't just Ethan's wife or Maya's mother. I was Sophia again, the woman who used to chase her dreams with her whole heart, not someone who had been slowly buried under layers of compromise and silence. I started to wake up to the idea that I could be more than what he expected me to be. At night, after Maya had fallen asleep, I would sit at the kitchen table, my laptop open in front of me, coffee growing cold in the mug beside me. I could feel the weight of my choices growing lighter with each passing day. I wasn't dependent on Ethan's approval anymore. I didn't need him to validate me. I could do this on my own, and I was ready to. But the deeper I dove into the world I was rebuilding for myself, the more I realized something. I wasn't just building a new future for me and Maya. I was also breaking away from a version of myself that I had allowed Ethan to define for far too long. It wasn't just about finding a job. It was about finding me again. The small changes didn't go unnoticed. At first, Ethan just seemed annoyed when I spent too much time on my laptop, but then the question started. "What are you working on?" he'd ask, his voice sharp, like he was just casually curious. But I could see the shift in his eyes. Something darker, more calculating. He wasn't dismissive anymore. No, now he was suspicious. I could feel his gaze on me more often, lingering longer than before, his presence like a shadow, always just behind me. It started with the little things, checking his phone at odd hours, standing in the doorway when I was on the computer, asking if I was going to that place again. The air around him felt tense, like I was being watched. And I was. The most unsettling part? He didn't say anything directly, but his behavior was loud enough to speak for him. The tension between us thickened, and my every move felt like a silent accusation. I couldn't breathe without him knowing where I was. It was suffocating. Then, out of nowhere, Lily reached out. My old college friend. We hadn't spoken in years, but when I saw her name pop up on my phone, I felt a strange sense of relief, like a lifeline thrown at just the right moment. She had a position open at her firm, something part-time and flexible. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was an opportunity to build something of my own. The guilt gnawed at me as I accepted the offer, but I had to. There was no turning back now. I needed something more than this. I needed to feel like myself again. But then came the turning point. A few days later, I noticed the new app on my phone. SecureTrack, it was called. I hadn't downloaded it, but there it was, with full access to my GPS, messages, everything. My stomach churned as I realized what Ethan had done. He was tracking me. I felt my blood run cold. This was no longer just about control over my time, over my actions. This was something deeper, darker. I knew then I had to move faster. If I didn't, this wouldn't just be about escaping a marriage. It would be about escaping a trap. And I wasn't about to let him put me in one. I could feel the air thickening, the weight of every decision pressing down on me. The morning was cold, but I was sweating as I pulled out the small duffel bag I'd kept hidden in the back of the closet. It wasn't just for me anymore. It was for Maya, too. I had already packed a few things for her. Diapers, wipes, a couple of changes of clothes. But I knew I had to be quick. There was no room for hesitation now. Every second felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I went to my desk, pulling out a folder I had kept locked in the drawer. My bank account, the savings I'd hidden in a separate account under a false name, everything had to be in place. I knew I had to take every last detail into account. I couldn't afford to make a mistake. I copied important documents, birth certificates, old bills, anything that could prove I had built something before he took it all from me. I didn't trust Ethan to leave me with anything. Every step I took felt like breaking free, like shedding layers of my past, of all the years I had spent hiding from myself. I had been a wife, a mother, but most of all, I had been invisible. Now I was fighting for my own life. I took one last look around the house I had spent years maintaining, cleaning, perfecting. It was beautiful, sure, but it wasn't home anymore. It was a trap, and I was done being trapped. The decision came in a rush, a sudden clarity that shot through me like a lightning bolt. I didn't need to convince myself anymore. I didn't need his permission, his approval, or his love. I was done. Done hiding. Done pretending. The only thing that mattered now was getting Maya and myself out. I grabbed Maya from her crib, my heart racing as I strapped her into her car seat. The weight of her small body against mine made everything feel real. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about her. I couldn't let her grow up in this. She deserved a life where she was seen, where she was loved, where she didn't have to feel like a shadow of someone else's expectations. Just as I finished packing the last of the essentials, I heard his voice. Ethan. His footsteps were heavy as he entered the room, and I knew right away that he was aware of something. Something had shifted. He had noticed my quiet movements, my odd behavior over the past few days. What's going on? His voice was sharp, more demanding than usual. Why have you been acting so strange? I didn't look at him as I zipped up the bag. There was no reason to lie anymore. I'm leaving, Ethan, I said calmly, my voice steady despite the rapid thudding in my chest. And this time, I'm not coming back. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing, but I didn't flinch. I had reached the point where there was nothing left to fear. I was done playing this game. I don't care what you think, I added, my voice still calm, but this is over. I'm done being your shadow. Ethan didn't respond immediately, his silence hanging between us like a threat. But I didn't need his reaction. I knew what I had to do. I reached for my bag, the weight of it no longer heavy with doubt. I'm leaving now, I said, walking past him, my back straight and my resolve harder than it had ever been. The door clicked shut behind me, and I knew that this was it. There was no turning back. It was 3:14 a.m. when I slipped out of bed, my heart racing, my breath shallow. The house was still, silent, except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft, rhythmic breathing of Ethan beside me. He had no idea what I was doing. He never would. Maya was still asleep in her crib, oblivious to the chaos I was about to set in motion. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on me. This was the point of no return. I moved quietly, the sharp edges of fear gnawing at my stomach, but there was no turning back now. The bag I packed was ready, the car keys cold in my hand. I picked up Maya gently, cradling her against my chest, and my world narrowed down to her warmth and the quiet determination in my heart. I opened the door slowly, careful not to make a sound. Every creak of the floorboards felt like it could betray me, but I made it to the car without incident. I strapped Maya into her car seat, feeling the weight of the responsibility settle in, the weight of her tiny body, the weight of the future I was fighting for. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if Ethan would wake up, if he would come after me, but I couldn't afford to wonder.
Not now.
I drove, the road ahead dark and empty, the city sleeping, unaware of what was happening. My hands gripped the steering wheel tight, my knuckles white, as I drove toward the one place I knew I could go, the shelter. When I arrived, the door opened almost immediately, a kind face greeting me. "Are you okay?" the worker asked, her voice warm, her eyes full of understanding. "We've been expecting you." For the first time in years, I exhaled. I wasn't afraid anymore. In that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about escaping Ethan. It was about escaping the life that had been suffocating me. They led me to a small room, quiet and simple. The bed was made, and the walls felt safe. I laid Maya down and stood for a moment, looking around. This was it. The road ahead would be hard, I knew that. There would be legal battles, custody hearings, and fear of what Ethan might do next. But right now, in this moment, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I was free. A few weeks had passed since that night, and every day felt like a small victory. My new job was a lifeline, something that pulled me out of the darkness and into the light, piece by piece. The work was challenging, but it was mine. Every design I completed, every client call I had, was a reminder that I had a future now, a future I had built for myself and Maya. There were still moments of fear, moments when I would sit in the quiet of my apartment, the weight of everything I had left behind pressing down on me. I would think of Ethan, his silence, his indifference. Would he come for me? Would he try to drag me back into that life I had escaped? But those moments were getting fewer. With each passing day, I was learning to trust myself again, to believe that I was strong enough to face whatever came next. Then one day, I received a message from Lily, my old college friend. She was getting married, and she asked if I would speak at her wedding. I was taken aback, unsure at first. The thought of standing in front of people, speaking about my journey, about everything I had been through, made my stomach twist. But there was something else there too, something stronger. I realized in that moment that I had come so far. This wasn't just about Ethan's control over my life. It was about me, about owning my narrative. I had the power now, the power to define who I was, to speak my truth. And I wasn't going to let fear stop me. On the day of Lily's wedding, I stood at the podium, looking out at the room full of people. Ethan was there, of course, standing in the back, his arms crossed, his face hard and unreadable. But for the first time in a long time, his presence didn't scare me. He didn't matter. I took a deep breath and began to speak, my voice steady, my heart full of everything I had learned over the past few months. "Love is important," I said, "but it isn't everything. At least, not until you love yourself first." I paused, glancing briefly at Ethan. His eyes were narrowed, but I didn't let it shake me. For so long, I let my life be defined by others, by expectations, by fear. I thought I needed approval. I thought I needed to be perfect. But the truth is, I was never going to be whole until I learned to see myself as enough. I could feel the weight of my words sinking in, not just for the crowd, but for me too. I wasn't speaking to Ethan anymore. I wasn't speaking to the woman I had been. I was speaking to the woman I had become, the woman who was free. I ended my speech with a smile, a real one this time. And now, I'm free to live the life I choose.
For me.
For Maya. I walked off the stage, my heart lighter than it had ever been. Ethan didn't say a word to me as I passed him. It didn't matter, because I had finally stepped into my own light, and that was all I needed.